Be grateful I even remembered you. That's what Vince Carr said to me. Didn't even lift his eyes from his tablet when I asked why my holiday bonus was a third of everyone else's. Just tossed that sentence like a used napkin across the table, then went right back to tapping some slideshow about Q1 optimization, like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of an entire factory. That's when I knew something was coming, not from him, from me. Because you don't run point on a robotics floor for over a decade and get forgotten, not unless someone wants to forget you. And that means they forgot how deep your fingerprints go, on every circuit path, every logic tree, every voltage rail feeding those 30-ton ballet dancers on the factory floor. Before I go any further, if you're already hooked, take 2 seconds to like this video and hit subscribe. 97% of folks listen without ever hitting that button, but that simple click helps keep these stories going. All right. Back to Vince. Lavin Robotics didn't start as a performance culture. It used to be grit and grease and laser calibration tables with coffee-ringed corners. When I joined, the founder Alan Lavin hired me with one line: make sure no one ever has to think about the power grid again. That was my job. I did it so well, nobody even remembered the grid existed, until the grid remembered them. See, while Vince was out here handing out theatrical Christmas bonuses and making speeches about scaling agile, I was the one syncing firmware clocks across 10 independent controller types, some of which were only still running because I'd hand-coded the integration layers myself. You don't just plug and play with robotic welders, thermal cutters, and hydraulic indexers. You dance with them, and I was the one who wrote the choreography. But all that history didn't fit in Vince's PowerPoint slides. So when he strutted onto that assembly bay catwalk, microphone in hand, and declared, "Everyone gets a gift this Christmas," I already knew something was off. Vince didn't do gifts. He did gestures. And gestures always came with strings. Everyone checked their accounts around noon. Smiles, cheers, even Ravi from IT clapped when he saw his $14,000 deposit. Mine, $4,000. Flat. No explanation, no email, no memo. I figured it had to be a mistake. So I walked, calmly, to his office. Knocked once. He didn't look up. Just said, "Yeah?" I think there was a discrepancy with my bonus. That's when he said it, word for word, not even a flicker of hesitation. Be grateful I even remembered you. That's the moment something in me went still. Not angry, not even sad, just still. Because when a man says something like that, it means he doesn't understand how the floor works, doesn't understand that I didn't just maintain the system. I was the system. 3 weeks earlier, I'd re-authenticated all my Vault Sync keys, routine stuff, part of the quarterly maintenance no one else ever touched. My name was still on every one of them as primary custodian, not because I insisted, because no one else even knew they existed, but the system did. And the system doesn't forget, especially when the person who built it is forgotten. I went home that night, sat on my worn-down kitchen stool, poured myself a glass of bocked cab, and stared at my tablet. One swipe. That's all it would take. One paused signal and the entire integration matrix would go into passive misalignment. Nothing dramatic, nothing destructive, just a slow, silent unraveling of sync across the whole floor. Voltage slippage, clock drift, safety loop stalls. It would look like a glitch, a hiccup, a ghost in the machine, but I'd know better. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was simply stepping back, just like he asked, just like I'd been reminded, gratefully. I didn't slam doors, didn't curse him out. Didn't stomp through the assembly floor like some wounded diva looking for allies. That's not how you last 11 years in an industry where machines never apologize and wires don't care if your boss thinks you matter. I didn't even tell anyone. I just went quiet. Because Vince didn't need to be yelled at. He needed to be reminded on a deeper frequency, the kind only machines in memory operate on. See, long before Lavin got swallowed up in quarterly metrics and brand initiatives, I built a protocol layer no one else touched. It wasn't glamorous, but it was elegant. A self-regulating, fault-tolerant sync matrix that governed robotic timing, voltage harmonics, and thermal tolerances across our 12-line facility. I designed it back when our biggest crisis was overheating servos during summer rush orders, not appeasing a boardroom full of suits who couldn't spell PLC. We didn't even call it the Matrix back then. It was just the Vault. Vault logic, Vault Sync, Vault Custody, a closed-loop timing system synced across embedded controllers using a rotating key authentication model, layered under the OS beneath firmware, invisible to every touchscreen the new hires bragged about mastering. What most folks saw was the front-end interface, a tidy little dashboard that blinked green when all systems were happy. What they didn't see were the fail-safes. Failsafe 1. If voltage drift exceeded tolerance for more than 90 seconds, issue an internal alignment check. Failsafe 2. If 3 consecutive alignment checks failed and the root custodian key was inactive, trigger progressive shutdown mode. Failsafe 3. Lock out any manual override until the primary vault key is reactivated or a notarized transfer protocol is submitted. Guess whose name sits on every one of those protocols? Not Vince Carr. Not his flavor of the month IT contractor who thinks proprietary architecture means Google Sheets with a dark theme. Mine. And I'd made sure of it after the last audit, when they tried to streamline my role by merging systems and facilities under one bloated VP. I rewrote the sublayer docs, recertified the sync protocol, filed a legal patent claim under my name, tied to custodial vault auth number 7.4b. Not because I was spiteful, because I was careful, and because I knew a day like this would come. A day when someone with a gold watch and a weak handshake would decide I wasn't necessary anymore. But systems don't run on smiles. They run on clock pulses, and sync, and trust. So when Vince smirked and dismissed me with a half-hearted line about how I should be grateful, all I could think about was the little blinking subroutine buried in the basement of our mainframe. A simple conditional loop, just waiting to be ignored. If custodian signal equals null, initiate drift. If drift equals sustained, initiate phase 1. If phase 1 equals ignored for 48 hours, phase 2 begins. Progressive shutdown mode wasn't dramatic. That's what made it so brutal. First, latency starts creeping in, milliseconds at first, then seconds. Robot arms stall mid-swing. Laser cutters misalign by fractions of a degree. Conveyor speeds become just slow enough to cause collision detection to trigger. Then the welders go dark. People blame power, blame firmware, blame vendors, but the vault knows. It doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, and it doesn't run without me. I didn't touch a line of code, didn't unplug a single thing. All I did was turn off my key, paused, not deleted, not revoked, just quiet. The same kind of quiet Vince thought I was when he looked through me. Only difference? My kind of quiet echoes. The air was dry that night. Static prone, December brittle. I sat at my kitchen table, same way I always did, laptop open beside a mug of chamomile I wouldn't finish. No music, no noise, just the hum of the fridge and the cursor blinking on my Vault interface. I didn't hesitate, no angry typing, no dramatic keystrokes. Just one clean command, pause Vault sync authorization. The system asked, as always, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes. That was it. 11 years of presence turned into a silence the factory didn't know how to interpret. See, Vince thought removing people was easy. Replace them, downsize them, reward them according to optics. But machines, they don't work like that. You remove the one variable they weren't built to account for, and they don't get angry. They just wait. Then they drift. The Vault had been monitoring microvolt alignment across Line 3's servo clusters for years. It tolerated small inconsistencies, adjusted in real time, flagged edge cases for silent correction. But without a sync signal, those corrections degrade. Slowly, invisibly. Voltage latency started to climb before midnight. Nothing major, just a few microseconds, then a few milliseconds, just enough to shift harmonics across the high-torque arms used for base frame welding. That's when the PID controllers started to overshoot. That's when small temperature oscillations in the plasma cutters went from self-correcting to self-defeating. From outside, it still looked like everything was fine. But the core knew better. Section 4B always ran hot in winter. Tight duct routing and heavy steel duty. The Vault usually offset it with minor timing tweaks in the warm-up cycle. Without those tweaks, at 3:14 a.m., the grid breaker popped. Power surge ripple, one flicker of imbalance, just long enough for the local systems to panic and self-lock. 5 seconds later, Zone 4C initiated precautionary lockdown. Standard protocol, keep the error contained, isolate the variable, only now the variable was everywhere. I was asleep when it happened, or close enough to it. Phone in airplane mode, Curtains pulled, nothing buzzing, nothing pinging. My cat jumped onto the bed around 3:20, purred like the world was peaceful. I didn't check the logs until morning. Didn't need to. I already knew how it would unfold. By 4 a.m., maintenance would do a cold reboot of the breaker and run diagnostics. They'd find nothing. By 5:30, it would begin digging through log files looking for a pattern. There wouldn't be one. By 7 o'clock, the assembly team would start noticing little hiccups, arms twitching slightly before resets, laser calibrations taking half a second longer than they should, conveyor belts inching just a little too far before the stop. But not enough to scream sabotage, because it wasn't sabotage, it was absence. A slow, widening gap between what the system expected and what it received. Not failure, neglect. That's what made it so perfect. Vince would walk in, oblivious, sip his dumb ginger chai protein latte, and think the day was business as usual. Maybe chuckle at his inbox, maybe plan another company-wide email reminding people to bring their full selves to work. He'd have no idea that mine had already left. Not physically, no resignation notice, no HR meeting, no badge drop. Just an invisible tether, unplugged. You can't measure loyalty in Slack messages. You measure it in the milliseconds between a system error and a clean recovery. That was always me, somewhere under the surface, fixing things before anyone noticed they broke. Now they'd notice. I made no announcement, no dramatic farewell email or cryptic calendar event, just one paused key. And the factory floor, the one I spent 11 years learning and shaping, started to forget how to move without me. It started with a morning shrug. 6 robot arms on line 2 froze mid-cycle just before shift change. No warning, no alerts, just stopped. Like someone pressed pause on a ballet they no longer believed in. Maintenance flagged it as a transient failure, ran a standard reset, and logged it under intermittent stall behavior. No one panicked. Not yet. Then the weld units on line 3 rebooted. Twice. They'd been in the middle of a calibration sweep when the temperature sensors glitched. It looked like the thermal profile had reset itself mid-read. Output dropped by 18% in the first hour. Still, Vince waved it off. Growing pains, he called it. Legacy systems catching up to innovation. That man loved the sound of his own nonsense, especially when he could say it from the glassed-in comfort of his second-floor office while sipping one of those weird charcoal smoothies that looked like printer toner. But then line 4 dropped a rig. Full assembly carriage, unbolted, misaligned, then released before the clamps had confirmed latch. Half a ton of metal hit the floor with a sick crunch that echoed through the building. Safety halted the line, blinking red across the dashboard. That one they couldn't ignore. Facilities scrambled to recalibrate the power relay feeding sections 3 through 5. Voltage drift had climbed again, this time spiking into caution territory. They tried to reset the harmonics buffer. Failed. The relay began pulsing, every 2 seconds. Surge, drop, surge, drop. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like something was trying to find sync and failing. Ravi from IT logged into the mainframe. He's good, sharp, fast, methodical. If anyone could trace the issue, it was him. But after an hour of digging through system logs, error queues, firmware snapshots, he hit a wall. There's no root cause, he said aloud in the meeting room. No fault injection, no malware signatures, no memory leaks. Everything's technically fine. Vince squinted like the phrase offended him. Then why the hell is it falling apart? Because... Ravi hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Something's missing. They tried a system rollback. Target. The last stable config from 3 days prior. It failed. Hard. Rollback dependency failure, the screen blinked. Vault sync unavailable. Custodian key not present. Ravi went pale. That was the first time anyone said the word out loud. Vault. He looked around the room and asked, "Did anyone check the signal sync authenticator?" Blank stares. Someone from facilities asked, "The what?" Another voice. "Is that part of the Schneider relay system?" "No," Ravi replied slowly. "It's older. Legacy. But core, like BIOS level for the entire plant." "Who maintains it?" Vince asked. Silence. Greg, the oldest guy in the room, half retired, technically a consultant, just muttered, "Used to be Elise." I imagine Vince blinked hard at that one, the name he'd so generously remembered with a $4,000 slap in the face. The name now wrapped around the one system no one else could touch. They moved quickly after that, but not smartly. Vince sent messages to HR demanding to know who had inherited custodial permissions. He barked at Ravi to force a vault restart. He asked facilities if the main relay could be just overridden. None of it worked, because this wasn't a hack, wasn't sabotage, it was absence. An absence written into the very bones of the system, a heartbeat removed. And every beat that followed got more erratic. By lunchtime, throughput was down 38%. Diagnostic queues were backed up. Shift leads were asking questions. But the surface still held, just barely. Vince smiled a little too wide during a walkthrough. We're doing a system stress test, pushing the plant to identify weaknesses before the new quarter, all part of the process. No one bought it. Machines don't lie. They just stop obeying. And right now, they were looking for someone they remembered, someone who was no longer answering. At 10:04 a.m., the factory crossed a line no one could ignore. Throughput plummeted to 42% and falling. Robot arms that had been acting quirky began collapsing into full safe mode loops. Lights blinked amber across multiple lines like some kind of industrial Christmas tree strung with warning labels. Heat sensors on line 6, which should have been running at 430 degrees, spiked to 515, dropped to 380, then froze entirely. Cooling systems panicked and overcompensated. 2 composite panels warped before anyone could even inspect the cause. People stopped pretending. Managers stopped pretending. But Vince still tried. We're just hitting a localized cascade, he said, pacing across the second-floor mezzanine like a community theater understudy playing CEO. We have backups, rollbacks, shadow sinks. Shadow sinks. God, that man loved buzzwords. Meanwhile, Ravi was in full triage mode, typing with both hands and muttering curses under his breath. Then Greg, good old Greg, who'd been around since the beta build of Line 1 and technically retired but still showed up most Mondays with a thermos full of burnt coffee and enough war stories to fill a maintenance log, stood slowly from the far table and said, "I think I've got something." He shuffled to the front, pulled a USB from his keychain, and inserted it into the master terminal like he was lighting a cigarette in church. A folder opened, one file, dated 6 years ago. Patent 99124C, Greg read aloud, adjusting his glasses. Signal Sync Custody Protocol, Proprietary Layer Logic. Vince raised an eyebrow. What is that? Greg clicked it open and scrolled to page 2. There. Everyone leaned in. A simple paragraph, no legalese flourish, just brutal clarity. Clause 7.4b. In the absence or deactivation of primary custodian keys, system transitions to unlinked sync mode. Manual override prohibited. Beneath it, my name, my signature, my credentials as primary custodian, verified and countersigned by 2 former department heads, both gone now. The room went silent. Vince read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. He looked up, but no one met his eyes. Because suddenly, this wasn't a tech problem. It wasn't a hardware bug or firmware rollback issue. It was a decision. His decision. He'd looked at an 11-year employee who had built the very logic their production floor relied on, and decided she was worth $4,000 and a throwaway insult. Now, the system disagreed. Greg sat back down, rubbing his knees like this was all routine. She built the sync layer back when we had 3 lines, designed the whole vault matrix when the old PLCs couldn't stay on time. We asked her to patent it in-house. She said no, filed under her name and licensed it back instead. Said, and I quote, "If you're gonna make me invisible, I want the rights to my shadow." Ravi spun toward him. This was licensed? Yup. And you signed off on it, Vince barked. Greg looked bored. You weren't here yet. I was director of integration then. Legal signed off. So did Alan. Elise even offered to train 2 backups, but no one had time. That landed like a punch to the chest. Backups, denied, redundancy, cut. Cost savings, they'd said. Streamlining, they'd called it. Now the plant was bleeding time, money, and credibility, and the one person who could resuscitate it had gone quiet. Vince stood frozen in front of the screen as if the paragraph might rewrite itself if he stared long enough. It didn't. Clause 7.4b just sat there, blinking in courier font like a judge tapping a gavel. In the absence of primary custodian keys, unlinked sync mode, manual override prohibited. This wasn't a technician going rogue, this was a foundation removed, and no matter how many emails Vince sent, no matter how many angry commands he barked, nothing changed the fact that the spine of the system had walked out and taken the rhythm of the floor with her. By noon, the factory sounded like a tomb. No welding, no conveyor rhythm, no hiss of hydraulic lift gates. Just the hollow buzz of lights and the occasional hiss from an overtaxed HVAC system trying to compensate for the thermal imbalance no one could recalibrate. Every single production line halted. Locked in a state that looked like standby but felt more like paralysis. No one had answers. Every override command returned the same error. Vault Sync authentication required. Even the admin level consoles, ones supposedly reserved for emergencies, couldn't bypass the loop. Firmware updates failed checksum validation. Cold reboots triggered a protective halt after 28 seconds. Safety systems were still live, thankfully, but the operational brain? Offline. Or worse, waiting. At 12:07 p.m., someone on Ravi's team whispered, "The heartbeat stalled." That's what they called it. The internal pulse signal the vault sent every 0.25 seconds to confirm full system alignment. Without it, the entire ecosystem couldn't sync task triggers. Every delay multiplied exponentially until each robot began hesitating, then idling, then folding into its own logic like a machine having a silent panic attack. Ravi stared at the system monitor, eyes red, tie askew, fingers twitching at the keyboard like a man trying to play piano with no sound. "It's like the whole plant is waiting for someone," he said. He didn't mean it as poetry, but it landed like scripture. Vince, now visibly sweating through his too tight dress shirt, slammed his hand on the nearest table and barked, "We need a solution. Now. Roll back, force, push, hot swap. I don't care what you call it. Undo whatever this is." Everyone turned to Greg. He looked up from his coffee, didn't flinch. "It's not sabotage," Greg said flatly. Vince blinked. "What?" "It's not sabotage," he repeated slower. "It's procedure. You signed off on the budget cuts that remove the author. This is what the system does when no one's left to speak its language." Someone in facilities quietly shut their laptop. The room was silent, except for the hum of vents overhead and the sound of a printer spitting out error logs no one would read. Vince paced like a man who thought motion counted for authority. "She can't lock us out like this," he snapped. "It's company infrastructure, company hardware, company systems." Greg shrugged. "But not company code. That logic's licensed. You remember what a license is, right? Temporary, conditional, revocable." Vince's mouth opened, then closed. He turned to Ravi. "You're telling me no one else can fix this?" Ravi didn't look up. "I'm telling you this plant doesn't want to be fixed. Not until it sees the right signature." That's what scared Vince the most. Not the halted lines, not the red blinking alerts or the missed delivery deadlines stacking up like dominoes. It was the deference. Machines don't play politics. They don't care about rank or titles or quarterly bonuses. They follow logic. And this system's logic said, no Elise, no sync. That clause, 7.4b, wasn't just technical policy, it was law. The kind written in firmware and executed in electricity, manual override, prohibited, workaround, blocked, patches, expired before launch. A living organism doesn't grow back its spine. And Vince had amputated his without knowing it. Now the body was limp. He leaned against the edge of the table, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in an hour, still trying to make it sound like leadership. "I'll call legal," he muttered. "Maybe we can challenge the patent, get injunctions, threaten—" Greg cut him off with a laugh so dry it practically crackled. "Yeah, sure. File a motion while the robots sit frozen, and your logistics partners start invoking breach clauses. That'll calm the board." Vince's eyes darted toward the door. He wasn't thinking strategy, he was thinking escape. And for the first time all morning, someone finally said it out loud. "You should have remembered the one who wrote the rules." It came in at 4:17 p.m. No subject line, no signature block, just one line of plain text panic in my inbox. "Hey, we're trying to figure out how to reauthorize the signal matrix. Can you advise?" No. "Hi, Elise." No. "Sorry about earlier." Not even a period at the end. Just a floating request, like a drowning man tossing up a hand and hoping someone grabs it. They didn't want me back. They wanted access. And they were already too late. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The message wasn't a question. It was a confession, one they'd type with trembling fingers and never speak out loud. I set down my mug, still warm, chamomile this time, and tapped open the system dashboard. One flicker, then gray. Timeout reached. Sync permissions fully revoked. The vault no longer recognized anyone, not as a precaution, as policy. In the absence of valid reauthorization within the designated 48-hour cycle, the system entered custodial lockout. Not digital, not recoverable with a new admin password or a clever script. Re-entry required notarized transfer documents, co-signed by a licensed engineer, validated against the original custodian's signature on file. Me. It was like watching a kingdom seal itself behind stone walls. Everything they thought they could override vanished behind legal firewalls and air-gapped protocols, something no one ever noticed because it was never meant to be noticed. Until now. This wasn't sabotage, it was insurance. Not for them, for me. Because systems like this, they break when you trust too many hands, when you assume that authority equals understanding, that some VP with a slide deck and a calendar full of acronyms can walk in, slash the headcount, cut the bonus, and expect the heart to keep beating like nothing's changed. It doesn't. Not when the heartbeat was written by someone who remembers how fragile it really is. They thought I was invisible, a cog. A legacy dependency in a folder they forgot to archive. Now they couldn't even turn the lights back on without paperwork. Paperwork they couldn't fake. Paperwork I had designed. Paperwork I had filed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vince had built his whole image on speed, agility, a momentum, fail fast. But now he was caught in the slowest loop imaginable. Legal loop, bureaucratic loop, custodial transfer loop. The system had rules, not flexible ones. Not emotional ones, certified ones. That's what made it beautiful. By 5 p.m., I knew the floor would be full of restless silence. Engineers triple-checking logs, ops leads calling vendors, HR nervously wondering if anyone was liable. Someone might have even started drafting apology emails. But none of that mattered now. The window had closed. They could call me, they could beg, but the system wouldn't care. And neither would I. At 6:42 p.m., the announcement dropped. Internal memo, priority flag, all staff CC. Someone in HR probably wrote it, but legal definitely scrubbed it. The tone was cold enough to refrigerate a server room. Emergency mode triggered, robotics line offline until system custodianship is resolved. Estimated loss projection, 4.8 MESM by end of business Friday. No apology, no explanation, just numbers and consequences. There it was. Vince's Christmas gift to the company, a silent floor, a pile of idle machines, and a mounting invoice with no off switch. Someone on the exec thread floated a plan B, spin up a parallel environment, virtualize Vault Sync logic to cloud infrastructure, bypass the dependency altogether. For a second, I imagined Vince's eyes lit up. He probably imagined himself giving some rousing speech about next-gen continuity. But then legal chimed in. 4 words. Patent 99124C, the license that started it all. Section 3.5 of the protocol agreement, filed and timestamped 6 years ago. All Vault Sync functions are licensed for on-premises execution only. Virtualization, replication, or transmission of core logic to third-party or off-site infrastructure is expressly prohibited. In plainer English, you can't move what you don't own. The sync logic was a body, and that body didn't do astral projection. Vince's options collapsed. No backup plan, no clean re-entry. The factory was now a monument to the consequences of forgetting the wrong person. Then at 7 p.m. sharp, the final trigger activated. Automated, no input, no warning. Across every executive screen, a PDF opened. Not an email, not a link. A direct local launch encoded in the Vault's time lock protocol. The title line was calm, understated. Custodial deactivation executed. Beneath it, in firm black type, manual synchronization denied. Root level access suspended pending full custodial audit. Vault system authority will remain sealed until authorized successor is certified and notarized per clause 7.4c. And then, at the bottom, one line they hadn't seen in 6 years. Signed, Elise Navarro, Custodian of Record, Vault Sync Protocol. Filed, December 12th, 2020. It had been waiting in the Vault's conditional payload queue for over 2,000 days. All it needed was the right set of failures. The room must have gone dead quiet when it hit. The kind of silence where no one breathes too loud because the air's gotten too heavy, where half the people are pretending to process and the other half are trying to remember whose idea it was to give Vince a C-suite title in the first place. But none of that mattered to the system, because the system didn't operate on ego. It operated on logic, custodial logic, and the logic still pointed to me, the woman who wrote it, the woman they cut, the woman they forgot, until every last machine remembered. I watched the steam curl off my mug like it was in no rush to go anywhere. Just me, the porch, and a sky turning orange behind the power lines. No alarms, no dashboards, no blinking red lights begging to be silenced. The kind of stillness you don't get when you're tethered to a factory heartbeat that only ever remembered you when something broke. The mug was chipped near the handle. I kept it anyway. At 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed once. Unknown number. I didn't check it right away. Let it sit on the railing while I sipped, let the day unfold on its own schedule. That was the gift I'd earned, the right not to jump. Eventually, I picked it up. One text. Hey Elise, this is Lara from Solin Tech. We've heard great things about your Vault Sync logic at Levin. Are you open to consulting? No exclamation points, no desperation, just calm recognition. An offer without begging. Respect without noise. I sat there, thumb resting just above the reply button. Didn't press it. Not yet. Behind me, the wind shifted through the kitchen window. I could still smell solder and oil in my memory. Heat-trapped afternoons fixing line mismatches while no one noticed. Back when the system hummed because I listened to it. Back when the machines worked like dancers and I was the metronome. They'd forgotten all that. Or maybe they'd chosen to forget. Because people like Vince don't understand systems. They understand symbols. They reward whoever's loudest, flashiest, most compliant, until one quiet piece goes missing. Then the noise becomes useless. I didn't send a message back, not then. Instead, I let the moment stretch, let the warmth of the mug ground me while I watched the sunlight climb across rooftops, inch by inch, steady as a sync pulse no one appreciates until it stops. No banners, no headlines, no parades, just proof. And the factory, frozen in its own memory, still whispering a name it had been programmed to obey. He remembered everyone, except the one who wrote the rules.